I want to remind everybody that tonight's presentation is officially part of the Cool Science Festival, which is going on right now in Colorado Springs it started Saturday and goes through October 13th. You can go to coolscience.org and check out the calendar to see what fun events are going on. The carnival day was on Saturday at UCCS, and I was there photographing that, and there was a lot of stuff going on, and my feet are still sore from all the walking around. Okay, so let's talk about dark sky and dark sky Colorado. So why do dark skies matter? And I am the newest board member of Dark Sky Colorado. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mike Pach, and I am the owner of Three Peaks Photography. I do night sky photography workshops. I teach classes, and I am also a working photographer. And Danny Robin, who lives in the San Luis Valley, is our board chair. And we're doing a lot of really exciting things, including adding more dark sky areas and dark sky communities in Colorado. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So I'll just run through these slides briefly. The mission of Dark Sky Colorado is to restore and protect the nighttime environment and protect communities and wildlife from the harmful effects of light pollution through outreach, advocacy, and conservation. Since I got involved with doing night sky workshops and my first introduction to Dark Sky International was through the folks in Westcliff. Westcliff is our first dark sky community here in Colorado. And once I started learning all the things about light pollution, I started noticing all of the light pollution that we have and all the lights that are on. And I drive by a place that's brightly lit at night, and I wonder why do we need all this light on this building? Those are the things that go through my head when I see light basically being wasted. But I am grateful to live here in Colorado in a place where I can, within an hour or two, drive to a dark sky place or a place that's dark enough that I can observe and photograph the night sky. There's a lot of people who don't have those opportunities. So we're talking about limiting light pollution, which enhances our stargazing opportunities. It also protects our nocturnal ecosystems and also preserves our cultural heritage. And if you get a chance to go online and look at some light pollution maps, it's pretty astounding what they look like. And it's pretty amazing to think that light pollution is increasing by about 10% a year. And if you look at a map of the United States, you see that there's a lot of dark areas in the western United States, but basically the whole eastern United States is pretty well light polluted. You can go to some websites that will tell you where there are some dark places that you can go to near where you live. And again, I feel fortunate to be here in Colorado where we have lots of dark skies. So let's just take a look at this slide. The components of light pollution. We have glare, which is excessive brightness that causes visual discomfort. Sky glow, which is a brightening of the night sky over inhabited areas. So if you ever gone out to photograph the night sky, even if you're far away from a big city, you can still see the bubble of the air glow around that city for many miles. Light trespass is when light is not being, or light is spilling out from where it's intended to be illuminating. And clutter is bright, confusing, and excessive groupings of light sources. So here are some examples of those. And here's an astounding statistic. 80% of North Americans can no longer see the Milky Way because of the effects of artificial light at night. Overall, the Milky Way is no longer visible to more than 1/3 of the world's population. And this is from the New World Atlas in 2016. So that number has probably changed since then. But I have had some people on my workshops who were older than me that had never seen the Milky Way before. And I was happy to be able to share that experience with them. But if you think about it, that's kind of sad if somebody has lived most of their life and have never seen the Milky Way before. So dark skies matter because we want to preserve our night sky heritage, maintain ecological integrity. Also, it helps with energy conservation and climate, human health and public safety, and also the reduction in light pollution helps with astronomy and new discoveries. So our night sky heritage includes things like mythology and religion, art, literature, navigation, concepts of time, and scientific discovery. Ecological integrity is tied to the way that our wildlife and animals respond to the interruption in their nocturnal behaviors. And one good example, or maybe I shouldn't say good, one strong example of that is the sea turtles who are attracted to the lights at night and will end up going towards the light instead of towards the ocean where they're supposed to be going. Also, light pollution affects the migration of birds. A lot of birds migrate in the nighttime, and the light pollution can confuse them and make them go to places that they don't really want to go to or throw them off their path. Also is inhibitive to firefly reproduction. Energy conservation, that's another thing that I think about if I leave my porch light on, which the HOA wants you to do, right? But you know, you're paying for that electricity, isn't it? And is it really helping anything? Is it just contributing to further light pollution? And there's lots and lots of studies out there that say that light pollution has a strong effect on human health. Things like obesity, depression, sleep disorders, diabetes, and breast cancer. It can also throw off your circadian rhythm and affect your melatonin production. Also, concern is public safety. And there's a study here that shows that having brighter lights outside your home doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be safer or prevent crimes. The HOA and the police department like to tell you that you should have lights on all the time outside, but this case study showed that sometimes when you have a really bright light outside, it can actually prevent you from seeing something like a burglar who is lurking near your door. And that's what this pair of photos shows. Also, the effects of light pollution have affected astronomy and discovering new things in our solar system and in galaxies far, far away from us. No pun intended there. And so what we are doing to help is doing some advocacy work, outreach work, and also conservation. I've been rather impressed since I've joined the board at how much work DarkSky Colorado is doing in these three areas to help preserve our dark skies here in Colorado. And here's just a photo of them meeting with some legislators and outreach is happening with education, raising awareness of the impacts of light pollution, going to events, talking to people, giving presentations similar to this one. And conservation, one of the biggest things that DarkSky Colorado is doing in terms of conservation is adding more dark sky communities and dark sky parks to Colorado. So I would like to encourage everyone to follow these 5 principles for responsible outdoor lighting. So use light only if it's needed. Target your light, so you can buy lights or put hoods on your light that actually will keep the light directed into an area that it's supposed to illuminate instead of spilling out all over the place and illuminating the sky. Using low level lighting, so don't use anything that's brighter than necessary. Control the lighting, use it only when it's needed. And then warm color lights have an effect on how much you can see in the night sky. Okay, so if you're interested in helping out with DarkSky Colorado, you can become a member by visiting darksky.org. And that's all I have to say about DarkSky Colorado for the moment. So hopefully this has enlightened you, again, no pun intended, on the things that we're doing and the importance of controlling our light pollution. So with that said, I'm going to start into my presentation on tips for photographing the night sky. So I've been a photographer for a very long time, and I started doing night sky photography workshops. I think this was my 8th season, and it's been a lot of fun. I have learned a new term called nyctophilia, and nyctophilia is the feeling of calmness in the dark, and that's what I feel. A lot of people get scared when they're out in the dark, but I feel a sense of peace and belonging when I'm in the dark and can see a sky full of stars and the Milky Way. Sorry, I'm admitting people as they come into the waiting room. So a little bit about me. I am a native of Chicago's South Side. I moved to Colorado in 1996. I have an Bachelor of Science degree in aerospace engineering from St. Louis University and an MBA in marketing from Maryville University in St. Louis. My interest in photography began in high school with my very first trip to Colorado. I went on a trip, a 5-day backpacking trip out in the Flat Tops area, and I borrowed my brother's camera and fell in love with Colorado and photography. And when I eventually got my own camera, then I ended up doing a lot more. But I also ended up working for the organization that I went on the backpacking trip with when I was in college, and they were kind of like Outward Bound, and took high school kids on from underserved neighborhoods, mostly in Chicago area, on 5-day backpacking trips, and that was a great way to spend my summers when I was in college. And I learned then about the principles of leave no trace and respecting the environment and the areas in the high country, which we're having some serious problems with these days. So I'm glad that I had the opportunity to learn those things early on in my life. I do specialize in night sky and event photography. So like I said, I photographed the carnival event for Cool Science on Saturday. I teach classes and workshops, and I have classes actually coming up on starting on October 12th. So I'll have a little bit more information about that a little bit later. I am the author of Colorado Springs Then and Now. This was a project that I did for the Colorado Springs 150th anniversary. And I'm almost sold out, so if you want a copy, let me know sooner than later. Um, and as I mentioned, I'm a current DarkSky Colorado board member. I'm also on the advisory board for the Pikes Peak Outdoor Recreation Alliance, which is an organization that helps nonprofits, for-profit organizations, and land managers um, be good stewards and educate people on the utilization of our natural resources here. I'm also an ambassador for Move Shoot Move, which makes the Nomad tracker. And we'll talk a little bit about tracking the night sky for your photography as well. A little bit more information for you. So you can visit my website at threepeaksphoto.com. Send me an email at mike@threepeaksphoto.com if you have any questions. You can follow me on Facebook or Instagram. I'd also would like to have you subscribe to my YouTube channel. I have some tutorials on YouTube about photography in general, but also some things about photographing the night sky and using the Move Shoot Move trackers. I do have a lot of photos on my Smug Mug and various galleries. And then I also have a store. I have a retail site, Adventure Cam Photo, where I sell inkjet papers, filters from Nisi, tripods, and some other photography accessories. And I have a special deal to tell you about a little bit later. Okay, so people ask all the time what gear is good for photographing the night sky. And I'll tell you what I use or have used. My current camera is the Canon R6, which I have really been liking a lot for my night photography. And one of the reasons I like it a lot is because the mirrorless cameras have the feature for focusing called focus peaking, and it really does help you to fine tune your focus and make sure that your stars are nice and sharp. It's really difficult sometimes to get your lenses focused at that infinity point, and when you use the focus peaking, it changes the things that are in focus to a color that you select. So for night sky, I choose the color red. And when my stars come into focus, as I turn my focus ring while looking at my live view, I can see the stars come or they'll change to red, and I can see them get smaller or larger as the focus changes. So it's very, very helpful. I've also used the Canon 5D Mark IV and the Canon 6D. The Canon 6D is still thought of as one of the best night sky cameras that's out there. And if you're looking to get into this, then that's a fairly inexpensive way to do so right now. For lenses, my go-to lens for night photography is the Tamron 15-30 G2. I've also used my Canon RF 24-105 and my Canon 17-40. For Nikon users, the 14-24 is a really good choice. Not that familiar with what Sony has, but I see a lot of people also buy the Sigma lenses, the Sigma Art lenses that have apertures of 1.4. And you have to be a little bit cautious about investing in those lenses to make sure that they actually are sharp, opened up at that wide of an aperture. So I hear from some people that they have to close down to 2.8 before they get the quality of images that they want to. So that kind of defeats the purpose of paying all that money for a lens that opens up to 1.4. So just use a little bit of caution, talk to other people, or maybe even rent something before you go ahead and invest in it. So there's plenty of places where you can rent some lenses and try them out for a few days before you make that investment. For tripods, I am, along with the Nisi filters, I sell the Explorer tripods. I really like my Explorer EXP Pro. I have a video on my YouTube channel that I demonstrate using it. I also have the Really Right Stuff Versa, which is an awesome tripod, but it also comes with an awesome price tag. So, I saved up my pennies to buy that, and that was before I knew about Explorer tripods. So if I had known about Explorer, I would have saved myself like $700. No, $1,100. So, but I do like the Really Right Stuff tripod. It's just that it's rather pricey. Um, I do use the Canon brand remote for my cameras. I do recommend that you buy the name brand remotes. I have gone through, I don't know how many third-party cheap remotes that some of them lasted less than a year. So it's worth it to me to spend the extra money to buy the Canon, because then I know it's good quality and it's going to last. And I have lost remotes before, and usually what happens is that as soon as I buy a replacement, that's when I find the one that I lost. So one of them I did lose. It was out at this place that we go to frequently on the Eastern Plains, and I lost it, I think in October or November of that particular year, and then found it when we went out there again in March, and it still worked. So, and I still have it in my bag. So now I have four remotes instead of two, because I have bought replacements for the ones that I lost. I do highly recommend that you add an L bracket to your camera. An L bracket takes the place of your plate for your tripod head, and an L bracket allows you to flip from a horizontal position to a vertical position with the camera without having to move the tripod head. So it can be a real pain to try to flip your camera over to go to vertical without an L bracket. And the L brackets are very helpful for that, and very helpful when you are doing panoramas with vertical shots. And then as far as trackers, I have both of the Move Shoot Move trackers, the Nomad, which is the new one, and the Rotator, which is the original one. The Rotator is now discontinued, so if you want one of those, you'll have to find it used somewhere. And then I also have the Skywatcher Star Adventurer, and the Star Adventurer was the first tracker that I used, first tracker that I bought, and I got frustrated with it because for me it's hard to look through the scope to align it to the North Star. And a Move Shoot Move came out with an attachment for their laser pointer that you can put onto the scope of the Skywatcher, as well as the Ioptron, that's a similar model to the Star Adventurer. And I was going to sell my Star Adventurer, but when I got this laser pointer and adapter, it made a world of difference in making it easy to align. So now I have all three trackers, and when I do workshops, especially the workshops in Westcliff, I can set them up and let my students try them. So they are, I would say, using a tracker is a next level thing. So if you're just getting started with night sky photography, learn as much as you can and practice as much as you can before doing things like tracking and stacking. So you want to get the basics down and really get those fine-tuned before you start doing other stuff. All right, so some recommendations for camera gear. Camera body, have something that has a high ISO range. A lot of the newer cameras do have high ISO ranges. The very basic cameras like the Canon Rebels and the Nikon, what's Nikon's now, like the D7200 or something like that. Some of those have very limited ISO ranges, and if you have an older version of one of those models, your ISO range is probably going to be pretty short. I've had students come out on my workshops where their top ISO was only 1600 or 3200 because they were using a really old camera. And that's not going to help you too much if you are doing night photography to capture the Milky Way without any movement in the stars. You need that high ISO. And I typically will shoot at ISO 6400. So if your top setting on your camera is 6400, you can pretty much guarantee your images are going to be really noisy at that setting. There's some debate whether or not you should have full frame versus crop frame. I prefer having a full frame camera. For night photography, one of the benefits to full frame is that a full frame sensor will create less noise than a cropped frame sensor, and that just has to do with the physics of sensors. So when I shoot at 6400 on my full frame, you probably won't get those same results on a crop frame camera, but there are ways to fix and deal with the noise in software programs. So it's less of an issue now than it was before. One of the biggest benefits to going to full frame is just utilizing those wide angle lenses to their full potential and getting as much of the Milky Way in your frame as possible. And then DSLR versus mirrorless. As I mentioned earlier, I really like my mirrorless camera, and all manufacturers now have gone mirrorless, and they're not putting any new development into DSLRs. So mirrorless is the way to go, in my opinion. And the mirrorless cameras have so many great features and so many great features that will help with your night photography. As far as lenses, typically wider is better if you're photographing the Milky Way, just so you get more of that in. One of the drawbacks to the wider lenses is getting that distortion, optical distortion. So if you're photographing a scene that has a building, or like we photograph a windmill, if you're using a really wide angle lens and the windmill is off to one side, then the windmill is going to be leaning. And for some people, that's a problem. For some people, it's not, but that's something to consider. The biggest issue with shooting with a wider lens is that the shorter your focal length, the longer exposure time you can achieve before seeing movement in your stars. So if I'm using my 15 millimeter lens, I'm going to have a longer exposure time with that lens before I see star movement, as opposed to shooting with my 24 to 105 at 24. Okay, so when I shoot at 15 millimeters, I can go about 19 seconds before seeing star movement, whereas with the 24, I can do 8 or 10 seconds. So that's a pretty significant difference, especially if you're using a lens that's 2.8 and you need to get as much light in as possible to capture the stars in the Milky Way. For crop frame cameras, some of the common focal lengths are 11 to 16. I have both the Nikon and the Canon versions of the Tokina 11 to 16, and I have those for students to borrow. I think Canon, Nikon, Sony, Tamron, I think they all have a 10 to 22 or somewhere close to that range that you can use for this type of photography on a cropped frame camera. And then, of course, faster is better. If you have whatever lens you're using, you want to have a lens that has a very wide aperture. 2.8, 4 is really cutting it very close, to not being all that effective, but that 17 to 40 lens that I have, that's an f4 lens, and my 24 to 105 is an f4 lens. So if you have an f4 lens, you might be better off with using a tracker, but it also depends on what you're shooting, what your other settings are. And again, just be cautious of the lenses that open up to 1.4 or 1.2. Check to see how sharp they are, because one of the biggest issues with lenses, wide angle lenses, is something called coma. And coma is an elongation of the stars towards the corners of the frame. And at 1.4 or wide open, shooting at the edge of your optics, you have a much better chance of seeing coma at those wide open settings than you do if you close the aperture down some. So with my 15 to 30, even though it's a 2.8 lens, it's been recommended to me by our friendly Tamron rep that I shoot it at 3.5 instead of 2.8 to improve the quality of the images. Another really important thing, that's why I have an exclamation point next to that, is make sure you have a sturdy tripod. That $20 Walmart special with the tilt pan head just isn't going to cut it, because it's too light, too flimsy to hold up when you're doing 15 to 20-second exposures, especially if there's a bit of a breeze. So it's really, really important to have a good tripod. And what I have found that helps tremendously when doing this kind of photography is to weigh down your tripod. So most tripods have a hook underneath the head that you can put a bungee cord on and bungee your camera bag to the bottom of your tripod. Or there's also these things called stone bags, and a stone bag has Velcro strips that you attach to the legs of your tripod, and it's just a pouch that you can put stones or rocks in it, or a bag or something heavy to weigh down the tripod. And I have seen an improvement in my photographs, especially in movement of the stars, because movement can be caused by just about anything. And if I'm working with a group of students and we're just getting started photographing the stars, and I look at your photo and I see that your stars look like footballs instead of little nice round spots, then we're going to investigate and see what's happening. And a lot of times that movement is caused by something being loose on your tripod not being sturdy enough. And then if we tighten things up or weigh it down, then most times those problems go away. Also, it is a must for you to have a remote. People will tell you that you have to have an intervalometer. You don't have to have an intervalometer. You can do a lot of things with just a regular wired remote. A lot of cameras these days have intervalometers built in, and an intervalometer is just a device that allows you to set things like how many photos you want to take in a certain period of time, how much of a time gap you want between those. It also has a bulb setting that allows you to set how long of an exposure you want to create. And then I mentioned the L brackets. I like the Really Right Stuff L brackets. I know their stuff can be pricey. And there are other brands out there, but I do recommend L brackets that are made specifically for your camera body instead of buying universal ones. So the ones that are made for your camera body, they fit it like a glove and they won't slip unless the little screw comes loose. So the universal ones, they don't have any way to hold the camera very well if you're in a vertical position. So a lot of times the screw will loosen up and then the camera slips. And I have two universal L brackets, and right now they're paperweights. I don't even bother using them because I know that they just don't perform very well. Okay, so I think this is a good time to take a little bit of a break and see what we have in the chat room as far as questions. Let's see. All right, so Bob says he has the R5 with the EF mount 14 millimeter 2.8. And so Bob, that works pretty well for you.
Yeah, it does. It works really well, and some of the old EF stuff is going for really good prices now in the used market. So I was able to grab that lens. It works really well.
Okay, great. Thanks for the tip. Yeah, I my Tamron lenses I use with my R6 with my adapter, also my EF lenses with the adapter have had no problems. So people are sharing their gear. Yeah, dark skies matter. Yeah, dark skies do matter. So my dark skies friends in Westcliff use the motto, you can see more in the dark. So there you go. Travis has the R7. Terry has the R6 Mark II. That was the one thing when I bought the R6, I was debating between the R6 and the R5, and I didn't really need that big sensor. I just wish that the R6 was a little bit bigger, so that the Mark II is a 24 megapixel. So Jen's using the Sony 16 to 35 2.8, and loves your Sony gear. Yeah, Sony was kicking everybody's butt with the mirrorless stuff. And I mean, you can't really go wrong with the name brand stuff. So Nicole says her camera's at least 14 years old. So yeah, you may have some challenges with doing night sky stuff if your camera is 14, 15 years old or even older. You can always do star trails with whatever camera or lens that you have. You can always do star trails. That's intentionally leaving the camera open for a long time to get movement in the stars. But the challenge comes when you're trying to shoot stars as points of light and not get any movement. So that can be really difficult. So Todd's used this Tamron 10 to 24 and 28 to 105. Yeah, so Trevor's asking, recommend wide angle for Milky Way or Northern Lights. Yes, definitely recommend the wide angle. So the wide angles in this range are sometimes called ultra wide lenses. So anything in the 14 to 20 millimeter range is, I believe, considered an ultra wide lens. So some people will prefer to get prime lenses like a 14 millimeter prime that's a non-zoom type lens. Some people think that it makes you a better photographer to shoot with prime lenses, and I think that's a load of BS. What makes you a better photographer is practicing and getting good. So don't buy into that one. But one thing you have to consider is that if you're spending money on a prime lens, say like a prime 14, pretty much all you're going to use it for is night photography. So is it worth the investment? Whereas if you buy a zoom like the 14 to 24, then that has a lot more versatility and it may be a better use of your money to get a lens that does zoom in and has zoom range. So yes, Tamron makes a lot of lenses for Sony. And Tamron makes very, very good products. And I'm not just saying that because I'm friends with the Tamron rep. I do like the Tamron lenses, and I would not hesitate to buy a Tamron lens over a Sony or a Canon or a Nikon. So Kevin says, I haven't done any attempts at night photography, but he has a R6 and a 14 to 35. I think that's a 15 to 35. I could be wrong, but my question to you, Kevin, is why not? Why haven't you done any night photography? So
It's on the list of things, and hey, I'm here.
it's on the list. All right. So, I mean, you and Jacqueline are into the spooky stuff. So, I would think that you'd be out at night a lot, and that you'd be comfortable doing that.
Well, yes, but work kind of gets in the way.
Oh, well, then it's time to quit your job. All right, let's see what else we have here. Other questions, then we'll get back to it. Kent says he uses the 80D with the Tokina 14 to 20 or the 11 to 16. Does that work well for you? And then Kevin, you have an old Manfrotto tripod. Yeah, so I have an old Manfrotto tripod that I've had for 24 years, and it's very heavy. And now I use it for my Star Adventurer. So my Star Adventurer is basically permanently attached to my Manfrotto tripod. Um, yeah, so the issue with the Manfrotto products is that Manfrotto, for most of their heads, they use their own plates, their own release plates for the camera. And those are not Arca Swiss type plates, not Arca Swiss compatible. So I have the Manfrotto L bracket. You can have it if you want it. I don't like it at all. And so not saying that I want to give you something that's crappy, but if you want to try it, you're welcome to it. But um, the universal plates are, or the universal system rather, is the Arca Swiss. And if you buy an Arca Swiss head, I think Manfrotto makes a couple of them. Then you can use the L brackets from Really Right Stuff and other companies. So the majority of tripod manufacturers and head manufacturers have gone to the Arca Swiss system. And if you buy Manfrotto, I think Manfrotto has kind of shot themselves in the foot by not.
Well, I should mention my
Towards.
Manfrotto was a $50 purchase off a coworker.
Oh, there you
It's good for
go.
what it is, but
Yeah,
I'd be open to getting a modern tripod if you think that would be a better
yeah.
approach.
And if you can remove the head, then you may not need to buy a new tripod, just a new head. So that's something to think about too. Yes, and the Explorer tripods I really like. And let's see, other questions. All right, so Roy says he just purchased the Move Shoot Move, and I hope you have fun using that. So Amy is asking where is a good place to buy And Amy, are you here in Colorado? Okay.
Hang on, can you hear me?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
good. It froze for a minute.
Okay.
I am traveling the country, and
Oh,
so it
okay.
is really difficult for me to order anything online. So I was wondering
Oh, all right.
how to look for a camera.
Yeah. Where are you right now? Amy froze up again. Oops. All right, somebody's talking about our friend Mark. Yeah, Mark is the Tamron rep, and he is an awesome guy. Let's see. Terry's asking if I have any experience with the IRIX 15 millimeter. The IRIX is similar to the Rokinon. I am not a fan of the Rokinon lenses. I bought one when I first started doing night photography, and I really wish I hadn't.
Hey, Mike, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah, I had a Rokinon, actually a Samyang sometime back. It was a good lens, but you have to manually adjust it to get to your infinity. It takes some doing. The IRIX, however, is spot on.
yeah,
I've not had any issue with it. It is manual, and I had to send it back to them to get the firmware updated to work on the mirrorless side through the adapter. So
okay, all right,
yeah, but other than that, yeah, it's spot on as far as focus. The only problem with that one I've seen is you get some coma and some chromatic aberration in far corners. It's
yeah,
not as bad as the Samyangs, but I've seen a little bit of it. Yeah.
yeah. I see a lot of people buy the Rokinons, and I see a lot of them. A lot of people recommend the Rokinons. I know. I'm pretty
It's because
sure.
they're cheap.
Yeah, it's because they're cheap,
Yeah.
and then I think
Yeah.
a lot of people don't realize that they are manual lenses, and I don't really like using the manual lenses. I bought one how many years ago, but I spent the extra $100 for the chip that communicates with the camera. But I spent 2 years using it and not realizing that my photos were really crappy. So I think it's one of those things, people recommend those lenses. Well, have they used anything else? And so when I switched from that lens to my Tamron lens, it was like night and day. It was a huge difference. And is there a better lens than the Tamron lens? Maybe. I would like to try some different lenses, but I've had pretty good luck with the Tamron. I did have to send my Tamron back because I had a decentering issue, but it's worked pretty well for me for the past several years. So, but I think Royce Bear, if you know who Royce Bear is, I think Royce uses the IRIX lenses on occasion, and so if you can reach out to him, he could probably answer your question for you.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
Hey, I've used the Rokinon, and I've got an IRIX lens sitting right here. I think the IRIX is far superior than the Rokinon.
Okay.
Really, really good lens for the price. It's not autofocus, but it's got the chip, so it'll give you focus confirmation and auto exposure. So the only thing that's actually manual on it is the focus, but it's a lot better than the Rokinon and the Samyang, which is generally iffy at best. I just went to the EF lens because I wanted an L lens and I wanted autofocus. But other than that, I think the IRIX worked well for a lot of the night sky stuff that I've done in the last couple of years.
Okay. Cool.
I was also impressed with IRIX because when I sent mine in to get the firmware update for the RF, they contacted me, told me that for some reason they couldn't update that one. They sent me a brand new lens.
Wow. They
No cost, just said, here's a brand new one that's updated for it. I'm like, okay.
They
Cool.
updated their office is actually here in Colorado Springs, their U.S. office. And they updated mine and actually hand delivered it to my house after they got done with it. So I was pretty impressed with their service too.
I didn't realize they had an office here.
Yep, right here in town.
It's you kind of drop it off. There's a courier that picks them up, and then they rotate it through and then get it back to you.
Yeah.
So it was amazing service.
I should introduce myself to them.
You probably should.
Yeah. So, all right, cool. I'll have to look them up. All right, awesome. So let's continue on with the slides and then check in later for some more questions. So can everybody still see my slides? Okay, all right. There we go. All right, so some other gear that you're going to want to have. Sorry, just got a message pop up about recording. You'll want to have a headlamp or flashlight. I prefer having a headlamp because then that allows me to have my hands free for operating my camera or carrying stuff. And flashlights don't taste very good, you know. So if you're not using a headlamp and you're using a flashlight, what happens is you end up biting on it. So I'd rather not do that. Warm clothing. I have a video on my YouTube channel to teach people how to dress in layers. And I always worry about people who come on my workshops who are from warm climates like Texas and Florida, because they don't understand that standing around in 45 or 50-degree weather for hours, you get cold. And the best way to battle that is to dress in layers. And you have to have a good insulating layer and a good windproof layer. And you can be pretty comfortable with, you know, there's that old saying, there's no bad clothes, no bad weather, only bad clothes. So that rings true when you're outside for long periods of time in the cold. Have a winter hat, gloves with you if you're going to be around here, because it does get cold. We were out last week and it wasn't so bad. It got down to upper 40s, and but the time prior to that I was out, I felt really cold. It was there was a lot more moisture in the air, and it got down to 45, and I was glad I had my extra layers on. Make sure you have some good boots or hiking shoes. Rain gear, good rain gear is good to have both for yourself and for your camera. So you never know around here when you might get a sprinkle. Usually at night, things aren't so bad, but there's only been one time in the 8 years that I've done my workshops that it rained all night, and that's pretty unusual for us here out in Colorado. Make sure you have plenty of water and snacks with you to last for the time that you're going to be out. Have a first aid kit. I've had people, you know, trip and you know, cut themselves and things like that. So also have a cell phone with you, or if you're going to be somewhere where there isn't cell service, then it's a good idea to have a tracking device. I know Bob has some recommendations for those. I have a device called a spot device, which you can use to eventually connect you by satellite technology to emergency 911. And so they will know where you are if you end up connecting with them. But fortunately, I've never had to use that. But that device requires a subscription. There's others that I know Bob has recommended that that do not require a subscription. And then I have a couple lens warmers. I have never used them. It's typically not an issue out here in Colorado unless you're out in really cold weather. And I'm always reluctant to put a lens warmer on a lens that has gotten cold. That's just me. I have that hang up. I don't want to crack any of the elements in my lens or anything. So if I get to the point where things get cold enough and my lens freezes over, then I'm done. I'm done shooting for the night. But yeah, usually we don't have the issues with getting fog on the lenses out here because it's typically so dry. But if you're out all night, you will reach the dew point, and it does help that I know that with my Tamron lens, the coatings help keep the dew off of the glass. So I have been out times before where I've had dew or even frost on my tripod, but my glass on my lens is dew and frost free. That's a good thing to have. But the thing with the lens warmers is that you also have to have a battery pack to run them. And so that's extra stuff that you have to have with you. So maybe somebody out there has some experience and we can talk about that a little bit later, but I have not used them myself. All right, so planning for your trip to photograph the galactic center or the Milky Way or the stars is an important thing to do. So the Milky Way in the northern, well, basically throughout the world, the core of the Milky Way is most visible from March into October. So we do have still a good opportunity this week. Wednesday is the new moon. So if you go out any night this week, as long as you have clear skies and good weather, then you should have opportunity to get some good Milky Way shots in a dark place. We have about a 2-hour window right now. So complete darkness is around 8:15, 8:30, somewhere in there. And then the Milky Way will be visible until about 10:15, 10:30 in this part of the country. If you have the opportunity this week, go out and get some good shots. Usually a few days before the new moon and a few days after the new moon, including the new moon date, are the best times to go out for Milky Way, because then the Milky Way will be most visible without any of the sky being washed out from the light of the moon. In this part of the world, in the northern hemisphere, the galactic core is always in the southern sky. It shifts from southeast to southwest as the season progresses, and also if you're out long enough, you'll see, because of the rotation of the Earth, you'll see the Milky Way shift from the southern sky to the southwestern sky. Preferably you are out when you have clear skies, but I've gotten some really cool photos when there's clouds. I remember somebody messaging me once saying that they had the opportunity to go somewhere for night photography, but the forecast was calling for conditions that weren't optimal. And then I shared a photo with him of the Milky Way with some clouds in the sky under non-optimal conditions, and he said, "Okay, you convinced me. I need to go." So, if you have the opportunity to go, just go. And you don't know what's going to happen. I don't like relying on the weather apps because they're typically wrong, and it's hard to predict the weather around here. Okay, so yeah, and if you can get out this week during this new moon period, you should have a good opportunity. Once we get into November, the galactic core will be still visible, but for a very short amount of time. The Milky Way itself is visible all year round. It's just the galactic core, which has the big concentration of the nebula and gases and stuff. That's what most people want in their photos, And so that's why we say we have a Milky Way season, typically from March into October. And again, with your planning, scout out the area. It's very helpful to scout out the area in daylight instead of waiting till after dark. And then you can look for things to use for foreground objects that will line up with the Milky Way or other constellations in the sky. If you use Google Maps or another app like that, you can drop pins to help you get back to those locations. You can use a planning app such as PhotoPills. So if you don't have PhotoPills and you plan on doing this type of photography, just buy it. It's the best $10 you'll ever spend. And there's lots and lots of stuff that you can use PhotoPills for. And planning your Milky Way outings is one of those. Make sure your batteries are charged, not just your camera batteries, but all the batteries for your accessories, like your maybe your remote or intervalometer needs a battery, or batteries for your headlamp, or your portable batteries. Like I have discovered that the Move Shoot Move rotators do not like the cold very much. So if you're out when it's below freezing, a good thing to do is bring along a portable battery. And then with the USB cable, you can plug your tracker into that portable battery, and that will last all night long. Make sure your lenses are clean. Get some rest. When I go out, if I know I'm going to be out all night, I'll try to get some extra rest so that I can, spend all that time outside. Make sure you're prepared for the weather. Make sure you have that warm clothing and that rain gear with you. And then for safety purposes, especially if you're going out alone, tell someone where you're going and when you expect to return. Bob has a lot of times been my safety person, and I'll say, Bob, I'm going here, and this is when I plan to return. So if you don't return by the designated time, then your safety person is going to start making some phone calls for you. And another important aspect of this is if you tell someone where you're going and once you leave, you don't have a way to communicate with them. If you change your mind, don't change your mind. Okay. So if you tell them you're going to point A and then you get to point A and say, this sucks, I'm going to point B, and you don't tell your safety person and something happens to you at point B, then guess what? If you don't come home, they're going to be looking for you at point A and they won't be able to find you. So just keep that in mind. So this chart is a chart showing the visibility times and the position of the galactic core for the new moon dates for this year. So I'm about to do this for next year's workshop schedule. When I sit down to schedule my workshops, I will first look on the calendar and find the new moon dates for that month, or I'm sorry, for that year, for each month. And then I use PhotoPills, the planner in PhotoPills, to look up each of those dates and then find out what the visibility time and the position of the Milky Way is. I'm mostly concerned with the dates and the visibility times. And then I put all that information into a table like this. So if you notice, looking early in the year, this March 10th date, the visibility time is fairly short, but it starts at 3 o'clock in the morning. So you either need to be out that late, or you need to get up super early in order to get there and see the Milky Way. And then as you go into the summer months, June and July have the longest windows of visibility, but they also have the shortest nights. So there's drawbacks and benefits to each month. Early in the season, so if you look at the right-hand column, I have my own notes as to where the Milky Way will be, or what position it will be in the sky. And so early in the year, March and April is a good time to go out if you want the panorama shots of the entire arc of the Milky Way stretching over the eastern horizon. So the core of the Milky Way will be towards the south, but the Milky Way itself will be low over the eastern horizon, and that's a great opportunity to go out and get those panoramic shots. So as we move along in the season, the Milky Way gets higher into the sky and becomes more vertical straight up above, and then the core shifts from the southeast to the southwest. And it can be fun to spend an entire season going out every month and seeing how the position changes, and even just one night being out long enough to see how, as the Earth rotates, the Milky Way moves from the southeast towards the southwest. Oops. There we go. All right, so here's a list of locations in Colorado for dark sky, or these are dark sky parks. So Great Sand Dunes, Dinosaur National Monument, Fluorescent Monument, which is close to us here in Colorado Springs. Somebody asked me about going out there on Saturday, and a couple things to tell you about fluorescent fossil beds is that, yes, it's a designated dark sky park, and the the Hornbeck Homestead is where you can go at any time. They leave the parking lot open, and you can go there at any time and observe the night sky and photograph. The challenge there is the traffic, because you're right along Teller County 1. And if you're shooting facing the east, because the homestead is on the west side of the highway, if you're photographing looking towards the east, then you might have to be very patient with cars going by. So that's my only thing about photographing out there. But I was out there couple winters ago. It was pretty cold, and we were looking for something. Well, there was a comet in the sky. We were looking for a comet, but we had some thin clouds, and I lost all of my the things that I look for when I'm trying to orient myself, my landmarks, my sky landmarks, and so I got a bit disoriented, and we ended up still having some fun, but not seeing the comet. So that's another thing, when you have these expectations about going out and photographing the Milky Way or night sky, you don't know what's going to happen. So just have fun regardless. And I always say that the experience of being out under dark sky is the most important thing, that the photographs are just the bonus material. And if you go out and you don't get any good photographs for one reason or the other, just be happy that you had a good experience. So just going down the list: Hovenweep, Jackson Lake State Park, Curin Conti, I'm not sure how to say that one, Black Canyon, Augusta, Top of the Pines, Mesa Verde, and Slumgullion. That's a fun word to say. And then dark sky communities: Crestone, Nucla, Ridgeway, Norwood, Westcliff, and Silvercliff. And our brand new dark sky community just announced, I think it was last week during our board meeting, is Paonia. One of our board members lives in Paonia, and so that's our newest dark sky community. Westcliff and Silvercliff were our first, and Westcliff used to be the highest in the world, but now Crestone beat Westcliff by 35 feet. So now Crestone is the highest dark sky community in the world. And then some other Colorado locations: Pawnee National Grasslands, Mount Blue Sky, Echo Lake, Summit Lake, and Mount Goliath, Picket Wire Canyon, Maroon Bells. I do workshops at the paint mines and have to remind people that permits are required to go to the paint mines. The county parks department not only requires that you purchase a permit, but they also require that you have liability insurance. So I think you can buy a 1 day liability insurance for like $50 or something. But if that's a detriment to you, then sign up for one of my workshops. And then, we've got lots of places out here in Colorado that if you can get far enough away from a city or a town that's emitting a lot of light pollution, you can do pretty well. So, like if you go out to the Calhan area near the paint mines, you can just go driving along those county roads, and you can find some places that it's dark enough away from the towns that you can see and photograph the Milky Way. I've even done some night photography in some places closer to Colorado Springs that you're right on the edge of that light pollution bubble, and you can, they're not as good as, going out to Westcliff or someplace like that, but you can still get in some practice. And because I do these workshops with the county parks department, and in recent years, we've gone to the pineries. And for pineries, we did last year for the Geminid meteor shower. We've also gone out to Cane Ranch, and Cane Ranch, you can actually see the Milky Way from there, but it's definitely not as visible as if you were out around Calhan or out in Westcliff or any of the other dark areas. So here's another look at light pollution map, another version of a light pollution map. You can see all of that light pollution in the eastern half of the country, and especially along the eastern seaboard. Yeah, I think there's a DarkSky location in Pennsylvania or something as like one of the few DarkSky places out east. But this website, DarkSky Finder, can be helpful in finding a place to go to. We also have lightpollutionmap.info. This is a light pollution map of Colorado. You can see all that light pollution along the Front Range there. I've gone to Pueblo Reservoir and photographed out there at night, and Pueblo has a surprisingly big light pollution bubble. Yeah, we were pretty, I guess I should say, unimpressed with all the light coming from Pueblo. And then darksky.org has an interactive map where you can look for designated dark sky locations across the world. So if you're traveling to other countries, you can look for dark sky places where you're going to be. All right, so let's talk about some different opportunities that we have for night sky photography. So obviously the big one is photographing the Milky Way. So I'm going to show you some examples of photos. And then if you notice on the bottom of the screen, I have the settings for the camera and any other special notes. So this is out at the paint mines. For the last few years, I've been trying to capture the perfect panorama at the paint mines. That's a lot of P's there in that sentence. This was taken in May of this year, which is a little bit late for getting the arc, but if you're out in early May, you can still get some good opportunities. So this is 13 vertical frames stitched together to create this panorama. And I've also illuminated the rock formations with some lights, and we're going to talk about low-level lighting in a couple minutes. So at this point, this is as close as I've gotten to the perfect panorama. So I'm not sure if I'm going to try much harder after this one, but it's definitely fun to get these types of photos early in the season.
It's stunning, Mike. Nice work.
Oh, thank you very much. I've been seeing lately, I've been seeing some composite images from the paint mines that don't truly show what it looks like out there. So that kind of stuff pisses me off a little bit because it gives people false expectations as to what they're going to see. So, if you want to create your own artwork, that's fine. But if you're, kind of fooling people into, going out there and expecting something that they're not going to see, then I don't think that's right. Here is one of the locations out in Westcliff that we use with this cool windmill. And meteor showers can be a really fun time to go out. And it's hard to capture meteors with your camera because they're so quick and some of them are just really faint. So it's to your benefit to shoot shorter exposures to try to capture meteors. And what I do most times is I'll just set up the camera with whatever group of settings I want, and then take my remote and lock the shutter in on my remote and just let it shoot continuously. So if you do capture a meteor, consider yourself extremely lucky because the odds of doing that are pretty phenomenal. And you can increase your odds by going out during a meteor shower. So the best ones that we have are the Perseids, which happen in August, usually mid-August, around the 13th or so, and then the Geminids in December. And from my experience, the Geminids are by far the best. The Geminids have a lot of fireballs, and the hardest thing about going out for the Geminids is that it's in December, so the weather can be really bad and it can be really cold. But I have seen so many great meteors and fireballs during the Geminids that I like going out during that time. So this photo was taken during the Geminids a couple years ago, and this is actually a blend of two different images. One for the foreground, which is a 2-minute exposure, and one for the sky, which is a 4-minute exposure. So just so happened that the meteor came in towards the end of the exposure for the sky, and that's why it's showing up there. So sometimes if you're doing long exposures and you get a meteor in there, especially if it's not very bright, then it can fade out as the exposure continues to collect in your camera. Photographing the moon or lunar eclipses is something that a lot of people enjoy. I'm not a particularly big fan of just photographing the moon in a dark sky. But if you notice the settings here, my shutter speed matches my ISO and my f-stop is at 11. And so that's what's called the Looney 11 rule. So you may have heard of the Sunny 16 rule, where you set your camera in the middle of the day, you set your aperture to f16, and then your shutter speed matches your ISO. Well, there's the Looney 11 rule, which is used for these types of situations where you have a bright moon against a completely dark sky. So set the aperture at f11, ISO. So if I choose an ISO 400, then my shutter speed is 1/400th of a second. If I chose ISO 800, then my shutter speed should be 1/800th of a second. And this is a good starting point to get a good exposure where you still have some detail in the moon. In my general rule of thumb, when I'm using the moon or photographing the moon, is I prefer to photograph the moon as it's rising up just around sunset before the sky gets dark, or just as it's setting when the sky is getting light. To have these situations where you have this bright light source against the complete dark sky is difficult for your camera, but I think that you can create some really cool images as the moon is coming up or as the moon is coming down if the lighting conditions are such that you're out at dusk or sunset or sunrise. So usually for moonrise and sunset, it's the day before the full moon where the timing works out. So the moon is coming up about 30 minutes or so before the sun is going down. So I try to do photos like that, or if I'm out when there is a moon, then I'm using the moon as a light source instead of trying to photograph the moon itself. So I'm using the light from the moon to illuminate things like rock formations and barns and structures like that. And then if you want to have a lot of fun with lunar eclipses, you can just create your own with a tortilla. And this this is what I did because I when we have a lunar eclipse, we normally see so many photos on Facebook of the eclipses. So I just decided to make my own, and I had a lot of fun with that. So, all right, other opportunities, comets. So we have a new comet that's visible right now. It's what, C2023 or something like that. And this is Neowise from a few years ago. And we had some great opportunities to photograph that because it was actually visible to the naked eye. So it was easy to spot and easy to put into your photographs. And programs like, what is the one? I think it's Photographer's Ephemeris that you can enter the name of the comet and it will tell you where it is. I think PhotoPills may have that function too, but I'm not 100% sure. Another opportunity is, I mentioned it before, is shooting for star trails. So you can do this with whatever camera and whatever lens that you have because you are actually leaving the exposure open for a long period of time to get the movement of the rotation or the seeming rotation of the star. So we're moving, but everything else appears to move when we do long exposures like this. So that's not a typo. This is a 32-minute single exposure. And you can see I have the North Star in the upper right-hand corner where everything appears to rotate around the North Star. So that's why we use the North Star for our alignment with the trackers and for navigation. So it's pretty easy to find the North Star by using the stars in the Big Dipper. And there's a couple different ways to do star trails. So some people will do a series of short exposures and then blend them together to create the long star trails, or you can do a long single exposure. So I prefer to do the long exposure because I feel that my star trails end up looking sharper if I do a single exposure, but that's up to you, whichever method works for you. One of the reasons I've heard for doing the shorter exposures is somebody said that somebody needs to mute. Okay, got it. One reason I've heard for using the short exposures and stitching them together is, oh, well, if you kick your tripod, then you can fix that. I'm like, well, first of all, you shouldn't be standing next to your tripod. You should be away from your tripod so you're not kicking it. And then secondly, if you kick your tripod enough to move it, then everything's going to be out of alignment. So one issue with doing the long exposures, and you can see it on this image right in the middle, there's a stuck pixel, a red stuck pixel. So if you see red, blue, and green little dots, those are stuck pixels. And one thing that will help get rid of them is if you use the long exposure noise reduction, but that doubles the amount of time that your camera is working. So if I use it in this case, my camera would be operating for 64 minutes. So that's a long time for it to be operating. Or you can just go in and get rid of those in your post-processing. Another opportunity is photographing deep sky objects or DSOs. I haven't done too much of this. This is about the extent of DSOs for me. And this is Orion. You can see the 3 stars in Orion, Orion's belt rather, and then the Orion Nebula down in the lower left-hand corner. So this was shot with my 24 to 105, zoomed in at 105 with the camera on the 1.6 crop ratio. So this is as close as I can get to things like this. And this is actually a tracked image. So this is a 2-minute exposure. If I did this without a tracker, then I'd have some pretty serious star trails in here. Another opportunity, somebody asked about photographing the aurora. This was on May 10th when we had that fantastic aurora show. And this is some property I have access to out east of Calhan. And it was phenomenal. So I've been watching there's a couple of Facebook groups with Northern Light Watchers, I think, and I look at the space weather forecast that's on the NOAA website. If I start seeing some chatter on the Facebook groups, I'll check the forecast, and hopefully we'll have some opportunities like this again soon. We're in a there's an 11-year cycle for the sun, and we're in like the top range of that cycle right now. So there have been other good nights recently, but nothing as good as we saw back on May 10th. And then you can also capture satellites in the space station. There's an app that I like to use called ISS Detector, and it will tell you when not only the US or our International Space Station or the Chinese one is going to be making a flyby, and it'll tell you the exact time and position. And if you're set up, then you can do long enough exposure to capture these. So this was a series of exposures, that 20-second exposures that I stitched together. This was just before sunrise one morning, and that's the space station going by. All right, so let's see, how are we doing on time? I can't see my clock. Let's talk a little bit about camera settings. And then I have some other pictures to share later. So as far as your aperture, you want to be using a wide open setting or close to it. So that depends on how much coma you have with your particular lens. So if you're shooting wide open at 2.8 or 1.4 or whatever it is, and you notice a coma in your corners, then close down your aperture a little bit. 1/3 of stop or 2/3 of stop is usually all that you need to fix that problem. Shutter speeds are typically in the 15 to 20-second range, depending upon your lens. And I highly recommend that, again, you get photopills and use the NPF rule calculator for calculating your optimum shutter time. So many of you may have heard of the 500 rule. Don't use the 500 rule. It does not work. The 500 rule was designed for film cameras and film camera lenses. It does not work for digital cameras. And if anybody tells you, oh, well, use the 400 rule or the 200 rule or whatever, just use the NPF calculator and PhotoPill. So that's under the spot stars function. And then you enter in your camera, your focal length, your aperture, and something else. And then it tells you what your optimum shutter time is before you should start seeing stars. And it works very well. ISO usually 1600 to 6400, depends on how bright or dark the sky is. high ISO noise reduction, I normally turn that off. I've been told on most cameras that it only works for JPEGs, and you should be shooting in camera raw. The long exposure noise reduction is what I just mentioned, where it doubles the amount of time that your camera is operating. So I say that's optional because it depends on what you're shooting. So if you're photographing really long exposure, then you may want to turn it on. If you're doing single exposures, then you may want to turn it on. But if you're doing a series of exposures to stitch together for star trails, then you should turn it off because you'll have gaps that you won't be able to fill. White balance, I usually set mine at 3800K. That to me gives me a nice natural look to the sky. You want to turn off your image stabilization or vibration reduction on your lens or in your camera or both. And then also if you're doing star trails, there's a way to calculate equivalent exposures. If you're switching from doing a shorter exposure to a much longer exposure, I have a YouTube video to explain how to do that. Okay, and then I wanted to take a minute to talk about lighting, especially low-level lighting. And these are lights that I either currently use or have used in the past. My current light setup is the LumeCube Panel Minis and the LumeCube 2.0. So I have 4 Panel Minis and I have 3 LumeCube 2.0s. I bought the kit, which comes with 2 lights, and then I bought a 3rd light with barn doors and some diffusers to use for the setups that I do. So DarkSky's stance on lighting or light painting is that if it's allowed in the area that you're photographing in, then it's okay, but it's preferred that you use low level lighting for a few reasons. One is because the light is usually very dim, so it won't affect other people who might be in the area that are stargazing or also photographing. Also, with low level lighting, you can direct the light onto whatever it is that you are photographing, so you're not spilling over into other places and again maybe disturbing somebody else or creating some sort of issue. So I actually much prefer using lights like this as opposed to a flashlight. For one reason, flashlights are pretty bright, and then you can spill over. You can really bother someone who might be close by. And also, if you're using a flashlight and you're waving it around like a paintbrush to illuminate something, it usually takes 5 or 6 different tries before you get it right, because you may end up over painting on one place and creating a bright spot, or missing a spot and then creating a dark area. So once you get these lights like this set up, then you just leave them where they are until you're ready to change things up and create a different type of look for your lights. And some of the challenges that we have, focusing is one of the biggest ones. And I mentioned using the focus peaking function. If you have a mirrorless camera, that helps a lot. One of the things you can do is use your autofocus function to focus on something far off in the distance, or like in the case with us when we shoot at the paint mines or the barns or the windmill out in Westcliff, we can throw some lights on those and then you can focus on those things. I have been noticing lately that using my autofocus is not cutting it, that I can start with my autofocus and then I have to use the focus peaking to fine tune my focus if I want to make sure that my foreground object and my stars are both in focus. And then it's helpful to use your live view. And you have to, well, if you have a camera that doesn't have the focus peaking, you would use your live view and zoom in on the brightest stars in the sky, and then in manual focus, move your focus ring until those stars become as tiny as possible. So the method with focus peaking is exactly the same, except with focus peaking, you have that colored light that comes on whatever it is you're wanting to be in focus, like your stars. When they come into focus, they will turn that color, like red. I have mine set on red. Composition is a challenge as well, because you can't always see what you're looking at. And you can throw out some lights, illuminate something, and then make your adjustments to your composition. Or one trick that I like to use is I'll just take my ISO and turn it up as high as it can go, and then take a 1 or 2 second shot, and then that gives me an idea of what's in my frame. One problem with that, which I've done many times now, is that I forget to change the ISO down to what it's supposed to be, and then I take my shot and it ends up being grossly overexposed. Light pollution can be a challenge, as well as the weather. But as far as the weather, if you have the chance to go, just go, and you'd be surprised at what can happen, even when the forecast is poor. Vehicles going by, or airplanes. Oh, it's amazing how many airplanes there are flying around. And so you either have to be very patient, or get good at removing that in your post-processing. Noise can be a challenge as well, especially if your camera doesn't perform well at high ISOs. So you can remove noise with stacking, the in-camera noise reduction function, and post-production. So there's some great tools that we have at our disposal for reducing noise. If you use Lightroom or Camera Raw, the denoise AI tool is really, really good. And then, of course, star movement. If you have too long of an exposure, then you'll have movement in your stars. And that's where tracking comes in. So if you're using a longer lens, then it's going to be more of a challenge, because the longer your focal length, the less time it takes to see star movement. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I feel that tracking is a next level thing. So once you get all these other things down, then I would recommend moving into tracking if you want to do that. So another thing I'll say is that this type of photography is not something that we can go out and practice every night unless you live in a dark area. And so it takes a long time to learn these things, and there's so many things that can go wrong, that I just encourage you to be patient with yourself. Don't get too disappointed if you come home and you found out that you made a mistake somewhere and your pictures aren't as good as you thought they were. I mean, that happens to me. And again, I just feel that the most important thing is having the experience. And if you've gone to a place that you can easily get to before, then that just gives you an excuse to go back out there and do some more practicing. So, and then a few apps. Some people like the Photographer's Ephemeris. Photo Pills is my #1 choice. I'm not a huge app user, but I would say #1 on the list should be Photo Pills. And Photo Pills can help you with your planning as well as your viewing. Photo Pills has a augmented reality, and it allows you to see what you're looking at in the sky. There's a whole bunch of apps like that, like Planets and Skyview, that'll help you identify what you're looking at. Also, as I mentioned, I don't put a whole lot of stock into the weather apps. A lot of times they're wrong, especially around here. So yeah, if there's a blizzard barreling down on us, or something like that, of course that's more critical. But if you're talking about making a decision whether or not to go out, and your app says there's going to be 50% cloud cover, I would still go, because I don't know how they can even predict cloud cover, and it's a big sky. So the things change so quickly, and I've seen weather apps be 100% wrong. And so I usually don't let that make my decision for you. If I have the opportunity to go somewhere, I just go. And a lot of times things change in my favor. And I also would say if we're going to go out and be out late, to stay till at least 2 in the morning. I have seen the weirdest things happen at 2 o'clock in the morning, where it could be completely cloudy, and then at 2 o'clock the sky clears up completely, and there's not a cloud for the rest of the evening. So just be patient and have fun. And then I also mentioned the ISS detector app that I like a lot, and that's just to see if the space station is going to be visible. And there's another app too, I think, that will allow you to see different satellites and things like that. So if you're into watching those things, then that could be fun as well. All right. Let's see. I think we can take some questions. Go back. See. Not sure where we left off with the questions. Wow, there's a lot of questions here. Okay, I think this was the last one here. Bob mentioned shooting in the Arizona desert, and surprising how cold it gets. Yes, so bring your warm clothes. For this Wednesdays with the new moon, is there a good chance to catch the comet from Colorado? From what I've been reading, the comet is visible early in the morning I think it's the eastern sky, shortly before sunrise. So don't quote me on that. I would say to look up some information. You probably find a bunch of articles that will tell you how to best view it, or where it's going to be visible and what time. That I have seen some photos on Facebook, some pretty impressive photos. So hopefully it's a good opportunity that will last for us for a while. Todd, don't forget Westcliff and the Wet Mountain Valley. Yep. So as I mentioned, Westcliff is our first dark sky community. They are trying to make the San Luis Valley, the valley on the other side of the Sangres, the largest dark sky refuge in the world. So that's been going on for several years. So Marta said she had a great time at Grand Mesa. Chris is asking about dark sky communities in Nevada. You can check so Todd says Nevada Dark Sky, so that's probably the Dark Sky chapter of Dark Sky International. You can also go to the Dark Sky International website. Thanks for liking my tortilla lunar eclipse. That was a lot of fun. How do you set the camera for timing for star trails? So as I mentioned, I have a video on my YouTube channel for calculating equivalent exposures. So basically, the short version of this answer is to first start out by getting a good exposure at either 15 or 30 seconds. And it doesn't matter if you have star movement at those exposure times. The most important thing is that you have a good exposure. So set your camera to 15 or 30 seconds, and then dial in your ISO and your aperture so that you get a good exposure. And the reason for starting at 15 or 30 is because the math works out much easier by doing that. So you have to decide how long of an exposure you want to create. And then every time that you double your shutter time, you're increasing your exposure by one stop. So if I go from 15 seconds to 2 minutes, 15 seconds to 30 seconds is one stop. 30 seconds to 1 minute is two stops. 1 minute to 2 minutes is three stops. So that's an increase of 3 stops of light on my exposure. So I have to decrease the exposure by the same amount by adjusting my ISO and my aperture, or both. Okay, so that's the short version of that answer. But and the reason, like that picture I had earlier of the star trails was 32 minutes and not 30 minutes is because of the math. So it's 1 minute, 2 minutes, 4 minutes, 8 minutes, 16 minutes, 32 minutes. Those are all doubled times to increase by one stop. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. Terry. Yeah, so you can use your intervalometer for bulb mode. And a lot of cameras, like my mirrorless camera has a built-in intervalometer. Oh, Gene couldn't see the settings for the star trail. I believe that was it was 32 minutes. I think ISO 200 maybe, and I think f 5.6. So one of the things about doing the longer single exposure is that it allows you to turn down your ISO significantly, and then also close your aperture to get sharper stars. So Todd loves his Celestron Evolution. Cool. Oh yeah, and as far as Aurora apps, there's an app that I think it's called My Aurora or just Aurora, and it will tell you what the odds are of you seeing the northern lights are. So Jen asks, when should we use infinity focus when shooting long exposure night sky photos? So the thing about the infinity position with your focus ring is that autofocus lenses don't have a hard stop at infinity. And also I learned that manual focus lenses aren't necessarily at infinity if you turn the ring to where it stops. So you're going to be close to that infinity mark on your lens, depending upon how your lens functions. And so if you are using a wide angle lens, say like a 14 or 15 millimeter lens, pretty much anything that's 15 feet and beyond, 15 feet in front of you and beyond, will be in focus at infinity. So that's why, like, I think this picture of the windmill was taken with my 24 millimeter lens, but that's why like we can focus on the windmill or a barn or the rocks at the paint mines with those wide angle lenses and still have the stars in focus. But you're not going to be right at the end of that range of the ring on your focus. Some people say, oh, I just turn it to infinity and back off. Well, that's not really the best way to do things. The best way to do things is to use your live view and zoom in on the brightest stars and manipulate your focus ring until those stars are the smallest. Yeah, so Maria, I will be sending out the link to the recording once I get it back, once I get it onto YouTube. Okay, so Todd has downloaded ICSC for Clear Sky Chart Viewer. Not exactly sure what that is. Yeah, Bob mentioned going to 11 Mile State Park. Wasn't there an issue recently with Jim going out there and the park being closed?
Not at 11 Mile that I'm aware of. That's got a campground, so they're open all the time.
Okay. Well, I thought that's where he was, that he said that the park was closed. That he and Marjorie were going out there and it was closed
Um,
after a certain time.
well, technically, all state parks are the parks area are closed from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. But if it's a park with a campground, the gates are open because they have campers going in and out. I've never known them to really enforce that.
Yeah, I just remember because he was supposed to go with me that particular night and he decided to go to 11 Mile. And I remember him posting, I thought you responded to that. I remember him posting that he couldn't get in, the park was closed.
I'd have to double check on where that was. I don't recall that being at 11 Mile, but I'd have to go back and look. I'll check with them. I've been out there all kinds of times of the day and night and never seen the gates closed on it.
Okay, yeah, I've been out there once or twice maybe. Yeah, so I was out there once in the winter, well, December for the Geminids, and if you've ever been out next to a frozen lake, the ice makes weird noises. And they're kind of creepy. So anyway, let's just move on. I got a few photos to show you and some stories to tell. So this, of course, is a photo of the Northern Lights. This was taken last year in April. And I fortunately had already planned to do a private session with a client out in Westcliff, and he was visiting from Buffalo, New York, and we had this activity. So I got there a little bit early, and I could not see these colors in the sky, but I could see the columns of light. So I just set up my camera real fast to take a test shot. And when the picture came up on the screen, it was all pink. And I got really excited. So I just set up the camera and started taking more pictures. And then I called him and tried to give him directions to where I was. And then after talking to him for a couple minutes, realized that he wasn't going to be able to find me. So I left my camera there and continued to, or I set it up to continuously take photos for a time lapse. And then I drove into town and met him, and we drove back here. So this was a pretty cool night. I could see, or my camera could see color in the sky all the way up until just before sunrise. So it was pretty cool experience. Oops. So here's a single exposure again out at the windmill in Westcliff that we use. So single exposure, f3.5, 20 seconds, ISO 6400. And you can do pretty well with single exposures. You can see I forgot to take out the airplane here. So there's an airplane. The way to tell if you've got an airplane is that you see a dotted line because you have flashing strobes on the airplane. A meteor will be tapered on one end or both. Depends on, usually both ends because they're pretty fast. So it's hard to catch one in the middle. And a meteor will have color to it. It will be all green, or it'll be magenta transitioning to green, or vice versa. And then a satellite will be a straight, non-tapered line that's all white. So that's the way to tell the difference between those. This is something that was very interesting during the May 10th Northern Lights event. This is what's called the stable auroric red arc, and it's visible in the southern sky as the northern lights are active. And this is a panorama with 9 vertical frames. And this was just really cool to photograph. And later in the night, pointing your camera to the south, the whole sky was just pink. It was really pretty cool. But this is something that you can witness if the northern lights are active. So when you do tracked photos, you have some extra work to do because you have to take a photo for your sky and a photo for your foreground. So because the tracker is moving to counteract the rotation of the Earth, then your foreground is going to get blurry or fuzzy. So you have to take some shots, or at least one shot, with the tracker turned off so that you could get a nice sharp image of your foreground. And then once you get your tracked images of the sky, then you have to blend those together in your editing program. And the biggest challenge with an image like this that has so much detail in my foreground is that I had to go in and you basically erase all of these areas in between the fins and in between the parts of the structure here to make sure my tracked sky was showing through instead of my non-tracked sky. So and you can see here's my settings. So my foreground was a 2-minute exposure at ISO 400. My sky was an 8-minute exposure at ISO 400. So I usually try to keep the exposures between the foreground and the sky very similar so that it looks natural when you blend them together. And I try to push the limits of the trackers and see how long of an exposure I can do without getting any movement in my stars. And so far, the top or longest exposures I've gotten are 16 minutes. Here's also another track blend, and I did both the foreground and the sky, the same settings, f3.5, 2 minutes, and ISO 1600. And again, the challenge is where the sky meets the foreground, and you can see I did this with the inside of Photoshop with the sky selection tool. And you can see it did a really good job of selecting or separating the sky from the foreground where the trees are on the horizon here. Here's an untracked panorama that I actually did on Christmas morning last year. I was out in Westcliff making a video that's on my website. And I could see the Milky Way. So this is what the Milky Way looks like in the wintertime. And this clump over here, this is the Pleiades. And I just decided to see what I could do making a panorama. And normally people don't photograph the Milky Way in the wintertime, but I thought this turned out pretty cool. You can see on the far right, there's some light pollution, and then you can see like these green and reddish streaks in the sky. That's air glow, and that's just molecules in the sky that get excited, and we see air glow quite a bit when we're out in Westcliff. And this is a track panorama. Track panoramas are really hard to do because it takes a long time and you have to try to make sure that your camera's lined up well. And this particular night, the only cloud we had was right over the core of the Milky Way. But this is 4 shots for the sky, 4 shots for the foreground. So it's two panoramas stitched together and then both blended together. So that's a lot more work. Some people like to take their foreground shot during the blue hour and then blend with their night sky. So I'm not particularly a big fan of this method. One is that it's really difficult sometimes to blend your foreground with your sky when you take your foreground in the blue hour. You have to do some color adjustment, and it can be really difficult to make your photo look natural when you're doing a blue hour blend. And that's one of the reasons I went to black and white with this one, because the color in the foreground was just because it's all blue, you know. So unless you're using a different white balance. But that's the biggest challenge with the blue hour. And the other challenge is, you know, well, are you going to keep your camera and your tripod in the same position for what could be hours until it gets dark enough to get your sky image? So it can be really impractical to do the blue hour blends, and that's why I like to try to keep my exposures from the foreground into sky similar, or like in this case, because I wanted the trees to be more visible, I increased my exposure so that I could see more of that in the foreground. And it still looks like it's nighttime. That's another thing that I find a lot of people will make images that are supposed to be at night, but they look like they're during the day, and I don't know why you would do that. Here's another blue hour blend. We happened to be in this spot for a long time, so it wasn't that big of an inconvenience to leave my camera in the same position, but I wanted to get a little bit more detail in the mountains in the foreground to make this image. So this one turned out pretty well. All right, so I just want to end up by telling you about some things I have coming up and letting you know about some special deals I have going on. So if you're in the Colorado Springs area, this Saturday at the Ent Center for the Arts in the gallery, I'm part of the We Are the Sky exhibit. And I did a project a few years ago where I photographed a tree every day for a year. And those photos are in this exhibit, and the closing reception is from 5 to 7:30 on Saturday. I have tentative dates for Westcliff. These are not on my website yet, so you're the first people seeing these. So these are the new moon dates for next year: May 26th, June 25th, July 24th, and August 23rd. And then paint mines, I won't have official dates for the paint mines until January, when registration opens up. This is registration for those goes through El Paso County Parks. I can say with fairly good confidence that the first one will be the new moon date, April 27th, at the paint mine. So the others, I schedule them close to the dates on Westcliff. So if you're traveling from somewhere other than Colorado, you may want to, attend both. And then again, if you're in Colorado Springs, I have my classes starting on the 12th, and registration for those is open on my website. There is a discount if you sign up for all 5 sessions. So it's October 12th, 19th, 26th, and November 2nd and 9th. And then also letting you know that I am a reseller for Nisi, and Nisi makes filters, all kinds of filters, neutral density filters, polarizer filters, anything that you can imagine. They also have the Explorer tripods, as well as silent corner accessories. And I just got an email today that they're having a 20% off sale starting October 8th, going from October 8th to the 13th. So I'm able to offer a 20% off on anything on my Adventure Cam Photo website that is under the Nisi name, Nisi, Explorer, and Silent Corner. And you can use code SAVE20 to have that 20% taken off. For most of the tripods, I do offer free shipping. For the filters, if you're buying filters, shipping isn't that much, so it's just a few bucks. And if you, well, it's a little bit early because I don't have the dates right now, but you can save this code if you're interested in signing up for a workshop with me in Westcliff. Save 10. Actually, there should be no space there. Save 10 without a space between the E and the 1. You can go to my website and use that code anytime to save 10% off my Westcliff workshops. I can't offer the same thing for the paint mines because the county collects the money for those. And then if you're interested in anything that Move Shoot Move has on their website, because I'm an ambassador, you can use my discount code, 3 Peaks discount, and when you check out, and then I get a cut, a little cut of that as well. But that'll save you some money if you're interested in any of their products. And there we go. That's my last slide, and open up for more questions. So let's see if we have any more. Okay, a couple people had to run. Oh, so Bob, it was spinny. It wasn't 11 mile. Guess Bob's not listening. Anybody else? Oh, there we go. So
Sorry, what was that, Mike?
it was spinny, not 11 mile.
Yeah, Spinney is right next to 11 Mile, but it's pretty much just a fishing place. There's no real trail. So they do lock out those gates at night, but it was 11 Mile was open, Spinney was closed.
Ah, okay. All right. I thought he said it was 11 miles. So
Yeah, I think 11 Mile was in the conversation because they're all listed on the same website because the same manager runs both of them since they're right next to each other.
okay. All right. Thanks. Does anybody else have any questions before we wrap it up? Thank you, Linda. Anybody else? I open to any questions regarding the night sky stuff, equipment, techniques.
So Mike, I'm going to Iceland in December. I'm
Okay.
gonna be there the 22nd through January 2nd. The new moon is December 30th. Hoping to get some great shots of Aurora Borealis.
Cool.
But I messaged you. We did an email exchange a little while back that not sure my Sony RX10 is up for it. So being a little familiar with the Sony interface, I was thinking about renting like the Sony A7. Thoughts on the best place to find that and do that at a reasonable price? Because while I probably only need it for a few days, I'm going to be on an airplane, 2 weeks apart. So I'll probably have to do a 2-week rental.
Yeah. I know there's a couple places out there. What is it? I think one is lensrentals.com. And I see people shaking their heads. Yes.
Yeah, I've used lens rentals on some lenses. I've been real impressed with their shipping, very quick, in and out, very smooth process.
Okay. Because there was another popular one that I heard the opposite about their customer service. So maybe lensrentals.com is the better choice. Go ahead.
I was going to say Lens Rentals also bought out a couple of the other companies. So,
oh, okay.
they do cameras, lenses, packages, studio, whatever you might desire.
Okay.
And
Cool.
and you could do 7 days. You could do any number of days. You could do custom days with them. So,
Okay. And Bob is saying he's had good experience with them too. I don't personally have any experience with them. But you have two recommendations here. So one thing I would say, I mean, if you can afford to pay a little extra to get it a few days before you leave on your trip, it would probably be a good idea to practice with it, even though you're familiar with the interface. I know because like I've used I don't know how many Canon cameras now. Each one of them is a little different, even though the menus are similar. They can be different, and then the buttons are different. So I I use two cameras when I do events. I'm carrying two cameras on me, and I find myself still fumbling between the two because my mirrorless camera has functions that the DSLR doesn't, and I'm looking for that control on my DSLR when it isn't there. So, and then also I would recommend finding some videos or even there used to be a place that had classes that you could purchase for any specific camera. So if you're renting that A7, then you could purchase the class that showed you everything you needed to know about, controlling the settings on the camera and using
And
it. So
and before we jump off this subject, what am I looking for in the right lens to rent with that camera? It's at ultra wide, but
yeah, I think Sony has, I think somebody mentioned it earlier too. Sony has a 16 to 35 2.8. Yeah, there you go. I think Jen was the one who mentioned that earlier. So that Canon has a 16 to 35 2.8 as well. So Jen says she loves it. So I think that would probably be a very good choice. And then if you can find if they have they probably have a 24 to 70. That would be another good choice as well. Not necessarily for the Aurora, but for your general landscape shooting. So I'm assuming you're going to be out there, not just for the nighttime stuff.
my RX10 is it's a fixed lens, but it's a 24 to 600.
Okay.
But yeah, the reason I want to get a different camera for this is just it's only got the 1 inch sensor, which I
Right.
think is fine for general purpose, but not so much for night shooting.
Yeah, and you probably want to make some nice prints from your Aurora photos. So
Hope so.
yeah. So it sounds like Jen's got some good advice and good experience with her Sony. Yeah, and I don't know if I'm assuming lens rentals would rent Tamron lenses too, and maybe they're less expensive, but that might be something to think about as well. But that 16 to 35 is yeah, so she knows Mark, and if you want an introduction to Mark, or if you want to connect with him, he has I'm happy to do that, but he also has a Facebook page. It's what is it? Tamron Rocky Mountain Region. So that's his
Looks
page.
like Jen knows. Watching the chat there.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. So yeah, Mark's awesome, and I mean he will tell you if Sony has a better lens to offer, he'll tell you this lens is better than what we have, or vice versa. So he's honest. He knows so much stuff. I'm amazed at what he knows. I don't know how he keeps it all in his brain.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, cool. Well, if I don't see you before then, I hope you have an awesome trip.
It's not till December, so
Okay.
yeah, I think I'd like to connect with you before then.
Okay, great. Yeah, I did get your email the other day. Sorry I didn't respond, but yeah, I did receive that. So whenever you're ready, just let me know.
Cool.
Okay. Anybody else have anything? All right. Well, if nobody else has any other questions, we'll end things for tonight. But you can always reach out to me if you have any other questions or need anything. But I want to thank all of you for joining me tonight, and hopefully you'll have some great opportunities to get some good night photos. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.